So the first AI speaker today is Tim Huang, dubbed the busiest man on the internet by Forbes magazine. Tim Huang is the founder and CEO of FiscalNote, a government relationship management platform that uses artificial intelligence and natural language processing to help global organizations understand and manage their relationships with their governments. The global company, with offices across DC, New York City, Seoul, India, has grown to become the largest privately held company in legal analytics and reg tech space and powers 1,300 of the world's largest and most influential law firms, legal departments, and governments in creating a more open and transparent society through data. Without further ado, please give a welcoming round of applause for Tim Huang.
All right, how's everybody doing? Good? All right. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Tim Huang. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called FiscalNote. So what I want to do today is just talk a little bit about our company, kind of what we do, and really just, as a young sort of technology founder, talk about some of the challenges that we faced early on in our career. So, basically what we do at FiscalNote is we think about sort of this intersection between technology and the law. So one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is just the fact that law as a profession has become a lot more unpredictable. You have a lot more complexity in our world, a lot more political uncertainty, a lot of things that are sort of going on in the world that may potentially impact businesses. So a lot of people ask me all the time, what's sort of the big deal with government, right? Why does it matter? Why does it matter for the operations and the livelihoods of day-to-day people when people don't realize that governments, particularly at the national levels, have tremendous implications for industries, people's jobs, and the future. So at FiscalNote, what we did is we started a company where our mission is to try and connect the world to their governments. And we do this by creating software and technology platforms that take all of the world's laws, all of the world's regulations, all of the world's court cases, and stick it onto one singular technology platform for our customers to be able to access. Our customers are about 1,300 of the biggest companies and governments around the world, and we have roughly about 22 million users around the world that leverage our platforms. A little bit about us before I get into some of the technology and the cool stuff that we do. So we created something called the Government Relationship Management Platform, and basically what this thing does is it aggregates legislation, regulations, court cases, government filings, government documents from about 3 dozen countries around the world, and then uses a technology called natural language processing to make sense of all of those laws and regulations. Here are a couple of our clients. Uber's using us to understand how ride-sharing regulations are changing around the world. You might see AT&T or Amazon that are trying to understand sales tax laws or data privacy laws as it pertains to their business. So before I get into actually what FiscalNote does, I want to talk a little bit about the technology trends in the market. And I want to speak at it from a commercialization perspective, right? So I don't know if any of you want to be entrepreneurs in the future, but in thinking about sort of what the industry looks like and how it's changing in the future. So when we started to think about FiscalNote, I was a junior in college thinking about starting this company. And we thought about a couple of sort of technology trends that may potentially impact the industry. So the first, of course, is the movement of data to the cloud, right? So which may actually, for a lot of you, seem like pretty obvious, but even just 5 or 6 years ago, a lot of the software that was being deployed in big companies was essentially being deployed still over these really, really outdated technology systems. And so the movement of a lot of those systems to the cloud essentially has enabled a lot more agile forms of prototyping and software development. The other sort of element that I want to point out here is sort of advances in natural language processing and machine learning. And so and this is sort of what I want to spend the most of our time today, is largely just around why NLP and machine learning have become so prominent and have advanced so much in the last couple of years. So when you think about the the uses of artificial intelligence and different capabilities, I think it's really important to break it down from a framework perspective, right? So the real enabling capability around artificial intelligence is the creation and the collection of data, right? So whether it's sensor data or a wearable device or a mobile device or drones or satellites or whatever it is, this explosion of data, particularly initially from the internet, has enabled a lot of organizations to start collecting a large amount of data very, very rapidly. So once you have a lot of data, what do you do with it, right? Let's just say you have reams and reams and reams of data. Well, you have to make sense of it, right? Because you can't just, a human brain can't actually just take a look at all this information and make sense of it. And so that's where sort of the real kind of core of AI and machine learning comes in, which is leveraging particular types of algorithms to try and come out with interesting insights, right? So whether it's a self-driving car or using advanced computer vision to detect cancer, or when I was back in politics, using sort of data science capabilities for the 2008 presidential campaign, we were essentially thinking about how to leverage data for specific outcomes. One of the really interesting emerging trends around machine learning is actually this concept of emerging interfaces, right? So particularly within natural language processing. And one of the things that we think a lot about at our company is this concept of speech, right? And so whether it's, some of you may have seen some of the commercials for Watson, or some of the stuff that you guys use day to day in Alexa or Cortana or Siri, we believe that these are the new forms of interfaces where instead of pointing and clicking and pinching on devices, we'll start to act a lot more naturally with our computers, largely through speech and text. So enabling these technologies, I think, are some expectations that users have that have really been changing for the last couple of years, right? So particularly with respect to things like predictive analytics. And we see predictive analytics and we say, oh, wow, that's such a crazy concept that you can predict the future. But we see it every day in things like our weather forecasts, right? So using massive amounts of satellite data to be able to predict what the directionality of our weather might be, what you're going to do this weekend, what you're going to wear. We see this in our Netflix recommendations, or the way in which your notifications are batched on your social media devices. And so what we're essentially seeing is a world that's moving from reactionary user experiences to anticipation, right? So instead of you reacting to things, right, instead of us scrambling to evacuate people right before a hurricane hits, right, we start to anticipate these things using data and whatnot. So a good example, of course, is in something like high school dropout rates, right? So I used to serve on the Board of Education in Montgomery County, and one of the things that we were thinking about was actually leveraging machine learning to be able to predict, the likelihood of a student dropping out, of high school using the data points and test scores that they had, right? You start to anticipate that risk of high school dropouts. Or how do you craft medical diagnostics where you can actually predict, diseases, prior to them become very serious. Another good example is leveraging large amounts of data to be less reactionary to global terrorism and the risks that we have as a country. So basically what you're seeing is, because of these sort of changing technology components underlying a lot of what we're seeing, the expectations around how users are using technology are changing fundamentally. And one of the things that I'll mention for a lot of the entrepreneurs in the room is that one of the biggest changes is not actually a technology change, but a business change, right? In that great business success used to come from having great sales and great marketing, great advertising, great branding, but now it's coming from having great product and technology excellence and meeting the expectations of your users. So a little bit about the FiscalNote platform. So the FiscalNote platform is built around something that we call Pillar, right? So we go off into dozens and dozens of countries around the world. We scrape and ingest and extract as many different government documents as you can. And we pull all of that in, and we create web, mobile, and search applications on top of all of our different ingestion technologies, right? So we call this Pillar. And it's basically a pipeline technology, right? To be able to ingest, structure, normalize, classify, and analyze legal documents in a very, very rapid fashion. And we've been able to do this normalized across multiple different political governments, across different languages, across different document sets, that really has been able to become very extensible for a lot of our customers. So what do these things enable, right? They enable things like rapid searching across multiple languages of law. They allow you to be able to track all these different changes in laws in real time. They allow you to predict the outcomes of court cases and regulations and legislation using past voting patterns of our government officials. We can actually take a look at every politician. So we have about 37,000 politicians in our database, and see how they voted in the past, or what they're talking about at any given time. We can use something called sentiment analysis to actually take a look at how regulators and government officials are feeling about specific issues and whether or not they may enforce specific actions. And we can take a look at things like international capabilities, right? So what is the legislature in Poland thinking about right now around tax reform, right? Or how is education reform in Mexico going? We can look at all these different things basically in real time. And of course, one of the things that we're very excited about is our virtual assistant, which essentially enables you to ask legal natural language questions to mobile devices to be able to say something like, what is the legal risk that I have of opening up a oil and gas factory in Louisiana, right? Or if I want to start a tech company in Florida, what legal risks do I have, right? So we're starting to automate the interactions that people have, the base interactions that people have with their attorneys. And so one of the cool things we start to do is we're using all these technologies in combination. We're starting to automate a large portion of legal and compliance divisions within these very, very big companies. Thousands and thousands of lawyers that are working in these big organizations. We can start to automate a lot of the initial questions, the initial form processing, to be able to make companies a lot more efficient. Before I end, I want to actually talk a little about our company and how we got started. So as some of you may know, I'm a very young guy. Some of you may ask, how did you start a company at such a young age? And one of the things I feel really grateful about is having some great co-founders. So, these are my two co-founders, Jonathan on the right and Gerald on the left. We actually went to high school together. We went to a school over in Maryland called Wooten High School, and we grew up together in middle school and high school. We knew each other really well, and we knew when we went to college that we were going to essentially start a company together, right? So when I was a junior, one of the things that we had this idea, and basically what we needed to do is we need to get the company off the ground, right? So half the people will say, how do you get the company off the ground in the first place? So I grabbed two of my buddies. And what do you do when you're 21 years old and you're trying to start a tech company, right? You move to Silicon Valley. And so we moved to Silicon Valley, and we didn't have enough money to start a company. So we bootstrapped a couple $1,000s from summer jobs and some summer internships. And because we couldn't afford an apartment, we actually lived out of a Motel 6 room for a couple of months. And this is our first office. I kid you not. This is our first office, up to 5 employees. We had 2 guys sleeping on each bed and 1 person sleeping on the floor. And this is pretty much how we got the company started. A couple of months in, we thought this was pretty unsustainable. So we sort of came to our senses, and we ended up raising our first kind of, first investment round with Mark Cuban, Jerry Yang, the founder of Yahoo and NEA. And we moved back to Washington, and we said, okay, we're gonna build our company, number one, where our customers are, but number 2, where we're from. And so this is our first office in DC. This is the entire office. It didn't have AC or heating after 5 o'clock. But we were working 7 days a week, straight through the winter and the summers, and started building a company from there. And over time, we were able to sort of build a larger and larger organization, just to be able to sort of bring more people in. And it's been an incredible experience to be able to have so many individuals now working in our organization that feel so strongly about the work that we do in terms of connecting the world to their governance, but also leveraging some really, really cutting-edge technologies to make a difference in the world. So the last thing I want to end with, and this is just for you all, the students in the room, is just thinking about a couple of different trends as you may potentially think about businesses you may want to start, or opportunities you may want to pursue. So how many of you have heard of something called the Fourth Industrial Revolution? Some of you maybe. So a lot of folks are talking about this right now, about this sort of concept of being in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And so, whether it was steam power, electrical power, or personal computers in the 70s and the 80s, we are now living in a really, really rapid time of innovation and opportunities for a revolution to disrupt large portions of our economy. I want to give a couple of different examples, right? So, and you'll sort of start to see a trend among all these different capabilities. robotics and automation, right? So robotics and automation, here you have a good example of data, right? So becoming an enabling tool for physical devices, right? Raw materials for robotics that are fundamentally changing because the ability to model belief space and leverage cloud analytics for robotics is fundamentally changing, right? This, for a lot of you are very young, but 10 years ago, this was not the case, right? There was a lot of constraints around the ability to model some of these physical spaces and leverage cloud capabilities. But instead of talking about the technology, I want to talk about the impact, right? So the impact here is that in countries where we can't keep up with elderly labor forces, right? Robotics are increasingly becoming important for us to intervene in some of these markets. And more important than that is, I think, the inequality that's starting to pop up even between different countries, right? So 80% of the revenues from robotics comes from just 5 countries. There are 200 countries in the world, but only 5 countries generate 80% of the revenues, right? So what does that mean for wealth redistribution for the future of the world, right? As we think about sort of automation robotics in the future. Money in markets is a good example as well, right? So how many of you guys have heard of Bitcoin here? Right, so a lot more of you. And so the codification of markets and financial markets is something that is rapidly developing, and we've seen this in America for a long time, since the 90s, using things like PayPal and online lending services. But in large portions of the world, in Africa, in the Middle East, in China, in Southeast Asia, this is just starting to pop up, right? So the ability to leverage online payments and think about alternative currencies like Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of these sort of new coins that are popping up is a major trend, right? So what do you think about the implications for how governments control the flow of money, right? Because the power in governments with respect to their economies has always been that they controlled how much money was flowing to the system and how much how is flowing between different countries and how is regulated. But as alternative currencies and as currencies move online, a lot of that control that governments have goes away. Another good example is data as power, right? So, a lot of folks, particularly in the Washington, D.C. area, think about warfare a lot, right? So the protection and national security of our country. And there's a sort of emerging new category of warfare called cyber warfare, right? So you have warfare over air, land, sea, space, and now cyberspace that's increasingly starting to define a lot of the skirmishes between different countries. And so a good example of this, of course, in our recent elections with respect to the hacking cases. But a good example was back in 2014 when Sony was hacked. The U.S. intelligence agencies determined that it was from North Korea. And so in combination with the Chinese government, the U.S. government actually went off and shut down the entire internet of North Korea for several days in order to sort of have proportionate response, right? So these are the types of warfares that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis that may come to define a lot of the future. And ultimately, the thing that I'll leave you with is whether it's robotics or codification of markets or data as a form of power and who owns that data, fundamentally economic value, so the ability to create companies, the ability to start new innovative opportunities comes from the data that's underlying those opportunities, right? So economic value comes from that data, whether it's from sensors, wearables, drones, satellites, mobile devices, computers, the internet. All of these forms of data collection services are creating massive amounts of data and intelligence for you to be able to mine that data and come out with really interesting insights. A couple of good examples, right? So whether it's a self-driving car using sensor data and satellite data, cancer detection using images from the internet, online lending data to provide better forms of creditworthiness, precision agriculture using satellites and sensor data to get to exact parts of the farm that may potentially need water or sunlight. All these different capabilities are just being unlocked today in your generation, in our generation, because of the capabilities that are coming online from data and algorithms. And the last thing I'll end with is that economic power that used to be sort of concentrated around geographic opportunities So how big your country is or how many people you have is now being tossed away for how much data you've collected and what you can do with that data, which over the course of the next couple of years and the next couple of decades will be incredibly disruptive to the economic and political systems that we have in our world. So it's a very exciting time to be in technology and to think about some of these AI capabilities. And certainly we've been able to sort of see this firsthand. So with that, I will take, I guess we have a couple minutes for some questions. Thank you.
Hello, can you guys hear me? Okay, so if you guys have any questions, please raise your hands. We'll come to you. You can ask your question, and we'll move on to the next person. So please raise your hand if you have any questions.
Don't be shy.
So what are the limits of AI?
What are the limits of AI?
Yeah.
When we think about it, the commercialization aspect of AI, as it applies to how we create new products, a lot of the limitations come from things like domain expertise, right? So you can't just take a generic algorithm and apply it across multiple different applications. You actually still need a lot of humans to be able to train systems to be able to identify certain things, right? So I don't know if anybody here is from IBM, but one of the things that IBM has been really struggling with in their rollout of their Watson technology is basically they took this big AI algorithm, or a set of algorithms, and they're trying to apply it into banking and healthcare and law and energy and all these different applications. But what they're quickly realizing is that they need a lot of people to train a lot of their algorithms around specific domains, right? So you still will need humans and computers to work very closely together in terms of creating the right pattern recognition or detection capabilities or trends that humans actually do care about, and in incorporating that type of knowledge into the systems.
Okay, so we have the next person, and before you say your question, could you say your name, your grade, and where you're from?
Hi, I'm Manny, and I'm actually in 9th grade, and I have 2 questions. One, when was artificial intelligence made?
It's hard to say when artificial intelligence was made. I think historically, a lot of people talk about AI right now, but people have been talking about AI for decades. I mean, back to the 40s in terms of leveraging interesting forms of code breaking for World War II, right? So I think the line for the concept of artificial intelligence keeps shifting because our computers keep getting smarter and smarter and have more processing power, right? And so maybe what used to be called artificial intelligence 20 years ago is no longer artificial intelligence today. And so it's sort of a moving target, in terms of how people define AI.
Yeah. And also, so how was it exactly made up?
There's a lot of academics that think a lot about the future of computing, and these ideas around artificial intelligence have been around for a very long time, right? At the end of the 20th century, nobody could ever believe that you could actually have a device like this that you could walk around with, and that wasn't tied down to anything, that you could talk to people around the world, within a couple of seconds, right? For us in our generation, it's so simple, right? There's so many apps that we can use, like WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Snapchat. I don't know what other texting, whatever, right? That people can essentially use to send messages, but the capabilities of computing have evolved so much that people are just starting to realize what's possible. So I think that something that you may think is artificial intelligence today, that may seem impossible, right? Like a self-driving car or a computer that talks to you and like conversationally. All these things I think are very, very possible for the next couple of decades, and I think provide some really interesting opportunities. But also, if you ask your parents, they never would have imagined that some of these technologies would be coming online so rapidly just in the last couple of years.
Okay, so we're just gonna have one more question. So,
Hi, I'm Sneha. I'm in 10th grade, and my question is, if the fourth industrial revolution is the improvement of AI, what do you think the fifth one will be?
So I did get this question before. It's really hard to imagine. So it's sort of like asking Rockefeller or Carnegie in 1870 or 1880. What is the next industrial revolution going to be? I don't think they knew that it was going to be personal computers. I think that what's really important, though, in thinking about the fourth industrial revolution is thinking about what the impacts of the fourth industrial revolution will be, right? So in the past, it used to be that economic power was concentrated in the actual things that you owned, right? So whether it was like steel or land or houses or factories or oil or whatever it is, the physical things that you owned resulted in how much power and financial capital you had at your disposal. The enabling force around the fourth industrial revolution is around how much data you have and what you can actually do with that data. It's a really, really interesting concept because a country of 1 million people can have a tremendous amount of economic power just by putting themselves in the right place and the right investment. But it also means that, quite frankly, because of the automation that comes along with the fourth industrial revolution, that we will most likely see a lot of income inequality start to pop up, both at the country by country level as well as at the individual by individual level, right? So in America, for instance, we have millions and millions of people that work every single day driving cars, right? Whether it's UPS trucks or vehicles for the government, whatever it is, truck drivers. And the reality is that with enabling technologies like self-driving cars, you will start to see a lot of income inequality emerge from an individual perspective as a lot of the automation starts to come in place. The second way to think about it is also that concept that I was telling you about, which is the 5 countries that owned 80% of the revenues for AI and robotics will start to massively accrete value over time, largely because the developing world does not necessarily have a lot of the resources and the capabilities and the talent to be able to make those investments. And so you start to see a very, very stark widening of countries over time, which I think is going to be very detrimental. And that's something that you have to think about, right? So within that context of increasing inequality, what exactly is going to pop up? I think there's probably going to be some political component to it, but beyond that, it's very hard to say what the technology component will be as well. Great. Thanks, everybody.